Hey everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. I wanted to briefly address a matter that I've noticed a lot of people struggling with. And in fact, some people have explicitly asked me about it and asked that I do a video on it. So here we are. What is that topic? Well, specifically, it's the question of whether or not individual bishops and individual cardinals have authority to bind consciences of all Catholics throughout the world. This comes up because I've actually seen a lot of um, bishops who currently don't have any assignment, they don't have a diocese. I've even seen some cardinals who have no assignment from the Vatican and no diocese present themselves as if they are able to bind the consciences of all Christians on matters of faith and morals as authentic teachers. And so it begs the question, who is an authentic teacher in the church? And by authentic here, I mean authoritative. Who has the ability to bind one's conscience? Um, is it just any bishop? Whether or not they have a territory, whether or not they have some kind of mission from the Pope, whether or not they have a diocese? Can any bishop, can any cardinal bind you as a Catholic, presumably for those Catholics who are watching, can they bind your conscience to assent to what they teach? Well, I think that we can certainly say there's a very loose and general sense in which anybody can teach, in a very loose sense here. Any Catholic can say, hey, here's what the truth is, and mention what the catechism teaches, or an ecumenical council teaches, or the Pope teaches, or of course what sacred scripture teaches. But when a regular Catholic does that, when, say, a layman, such as myself, when I teach what scripture says, I can't bind your conscience. I can't demand that you assent to what I say with religious submission of intellect and will. You will only assent to what I say insofar as my arguments are convincing. But we do know when the magisterium, the teaching authority of the church, when it teaches, even non infallibly, when it teaches authentically or authoritatively, it is able to bind our consciences and demand assent, religious submission of intellect and will. Again, I as a layman, I can't do that. I can only attempt to convince you of the truth of a theological proposition, but I can't bind your conscience. However, the magisterium, whether it offers you a good argument or not, can bind your conscience. In fact, it doesn't even have to offer you an argument. It's good that they do, but the magisterium can teach authoritatively and bind your conscience as a faithful Catholic without even offering an argument. Why? Because it speaks authoritatively with the voice of Jesus Christ when it speaks authentically. That is just Catholicism 101, Magisterium 101. I mean, numerous sources from the church teach that fact. But now we have to ask the question, again, can just any bishop, can just any cardinal get on YouTube or go to a conference and bind your conscience? Well, I can certainly grant, I think we can all certainly grant that at the very least, a bishop can do what a layman does, right? So if a layman can not necessarily bind your conscience, but however, present the truth insofar as they understand it and try to offer good arguments for it, if a layman can do that, well, certainly a bishop can do that. Certainly a cardinal can do that because they have holy orders and they have apostolic succession and they have an indelible mark through the sacrament of ordination. And they have certain charisms and certain assistance that is given to them. However, again, can they now bind your conscience? That's a different question. What I'm about to show you comes from two documents. Number one, from the Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, and then number two, Apostolus Suos, from 1998, promulgated by John Paul II. I'm going to show you that individual bishops and this includes cardinals, can only bind your conscience insofar as they have a diocese or a territory as some kind of mission that has been assigned to them at this point by the Pope. They can then bind the consciences of the faithful and require religious submission of intellect and will so they can authentically teach if they have a diocese, if they have a territory, but they can only bind the consciences of the faithful in their territory. They cannot bind the consciences of anyone outside of their diocese. That then means that an individual bishop or even a cardinal, if they don't have a diocese and they don't have some kind of universal mandate from the Pope, they're not the head of a dicastery or something like that. They don't have the ability to bind anyone's conscience when they teach. They cannot teach authoritatively. They can only teach insofar as any Catholic can teach, not by authority, but rather by persuasion. Again, just as a layman can do. And that may probably come as a shock to a lot of people. A lot of people, I'm saying, don't realize that. And they think that, well, hey, if a bishop said it or a cardinal says it, then it's automatically binding or it's magisterial. And I've even had people ask me, well, Michael, why don't you agree with what this bishop says? Or why don't you agree with what this cardinal says? You talk about how you assent to the magisterium, but they're a member of the magisterium. See, that's where we misunderstand things. That's where we're not understanding things properly. On the universal level, you have the Pope who can act individually for the whole universal church and bind the consciences of the whole church. That's the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. And then you have what's called the College of Bishops. This is the collection of bishops, not separately, not individually, but collectively acting as one unit, as one body. All of the bishops dispersed throughout the world, either teaching in unison or teaching in an ecumenical council. That is magisterial. And when they teach in that capacity, that is binding. That's authentic magisterium. But an individual bishop cannot bind the consciences of all Catholics universally, even one with a diocese, even one with a territory. And an individual bishop can only bind consciences if he has a diocese and only for the people in his diocese. So let me share my screen and let's briefly just take a quick look at this. Let's go to Apostolos Suos. Okay. Paragraph 11. Certainly, the individual bishops, as teachers of the faith, do not address the universal community of the faithful, except through the action of the entire College of Bishops. You get that? They cannot authoritatively address the entire universal church. There are some rogue bishops out there right now who don't have a diocese. Currently, they have no assignment. And they think that they are teachers of the universal church. Well, no, they're not teachers of the universal church in any more sense than any Catholic is. As far as binding teachers, no, they have no authority to do that. The only individual bishop who can teach authoritatively on the universal level is the Pope. So if they attempt to do so, they're usurping the authority of the Pope. They can only, again, teach insofar as they persuade people with good arguments. And again, that's true of any Catholic. So they cannot address the universal community of the faithful in any kind of binding sense. This is whether they do or don't have a diocese. It continues. In fact, only the faithful entrusted to the pastoral care of a particular bishop are required to accept his judgment given in the name of Christ in matters of faith and morals, and to adhere with it with submission of intellect and will. So, in other words, what this is saying here is that as far as binding authority, if a bishop has a diocese and that is your bishop, you belong to his territory, you're under that bishop, then yes, when he teaches authoritatively, you give religious submission of intellect and will. But if he has a diocese and you're not a member of his diocese, he has zero ability to bind your conscience. Only the faithful entrusted to the pastoral care of that bishop are to be um, bound to what he teaches with religious submission of intellect and will. And if he doesn't then have a diocese, then he has no ability to bind anyone's conscience from the former territory of his diocese, where he currently lives, or the universal church. In effect, the bishops teaching in communion with the Roman pontiff are to be respected by all as witnesses to divine and Catholic truth, and their teaching, inasmuch as it transmits faithfully and illustrates the faith to be believed and applied in living, is of great benefit to the whole church. So when a bishop who does have a diocese teaches his local flock, yes, that does benefit the whole church. Absolutely. So there are benefits for the whole church here, but they cannot bind the consciences of the whole church, of the entire flock. Only the Pope can. The individual bishop, too, as steward of the grace of the supreme priesthood and the exercise of his office of sanctifying, contributes greatly to the church's work of glorifying God and making men holy. This is the work of the whole Church of Christ, acting in every legitimate liturgical celebration carried out in communion with the bishop and under his direction. So there's a great deal of benefits to the whole church when an individual bishop does what he's supposed to do. But again, notice that the ability to bind consciences is tied to his diocese, and it's restricted to his diocese alone. Apart from that, he has no ability to bind consciences. It goes on to say in paragraph 12, in fact, the power of the College of Bishops over the whole church is not the result of the sum of powers of individual bishops over their particular territories. It's a pre-existing reality in which individual bishops participate. So you have this College of Bishops acting collectively, and that is able to speak to the universal church when all of the bishops speak in unison, either in an ecumenical council or jointly dispersed throughout the world. However, as individuals, it says they have no competence to act over the whole church except collegially. So if you have a bishop out there who thinks that his role, his mission is to somehow set the whole universal church straight, you need to watch out, because they have it twisted if they're thinking that they actually have authority over everyone. Now, if they're just trying to address the universal church to help them out, not in any kind of binding way, but just trying to persuade them to what the truth is, that's fine. But anybody can do that, bishop or not. Any regular Catholic YouTuber can do that. Any Catholic on Twitter can do that. Any Catholic on Facebook can do that, clergy or not. Only the Roman pontiff, head of the college, can individually exercise supreme authority and power over the church. So if you have an individual bishop or an individual cardinal who thinks that they can exercise universal authority, they are usurping the authority of the Pope. So no bishop, no cardinal can bind the consciences of the universal church. And there are cardinals out there who have no mission, no diocese. You know what that means? When they teach only insofar as they're persuasive, but they can't bind you authoritatively. They can't bind your conscience. So you just take it for what it's worth. If it's convincing, great. If it's not, it's take it or leave it. Lumen Gentium says, this collegial union is apparent also in the mutual relations of the individual bishops with particular churches and with the universal church. The Roman pontiff, as the successor of Peter, is the perpetual and visible principle and foundation of unity of both the bishops and the faithful. Notice it's the Pope who is the visible principle of unity, not a cardinal, not a bishop, not somebody who has been disciplined or not disciplined. The one who has that visible ability to be that principle of unity is the Pope. The individual bishops, however, are the visible principle and foundation of unity in their particular churches, in their diocese. And that's only insofar as they have a diocese. If they don't have a diocese, they're not a principle of unity for anything, because they don't have a flock. fashioned after the model of the universal church, in and from which churches come into being, the one and only Catholic Church. For this reason, the individual bishops represent each his own church, but all of them together and with the Pope represent the entire church in the bond of peace, love, and unity. That's when they act collectively. But when they act individually, they only represent their diocese. If they don't have a diocese, they don't represent any particular church. The individual bishops who are placed in charge of particular churches. Notice again, it's always that condition. They have to have a particular church. They have to have a diocese. They exercise their pastoral government over the portion of the people of God committed to their care, not somebody else's care, not some other bishop's diocese. So if you got one bishop who has a diocese, who tries to go into the territory of another bishop's diocese and teach his flock, unless you have the permission of that other bishop, well, you're usurping that other bishop's authority. And you cannot actually do that. You have no authority over them. And it says, not over other churches, nor other the universal church. One other thing I'll read to you here from Dulles, from his book on the magisterium. Following in the footsteps of previous councils, Vatican II asserted that individual bishops are successors of the apostles, and that this succession has taken place by divine institution. Although they are not infallible as individuals, all bishops are authoritative teachers, possessing what Irenaeus described as the sure charism of truth. Their charism, however, does not operate automatically. They must, like Timothy, rekindle the gift of God that is in them through the laying on of hands in the apostolic succession. Bishops are encouraged to take time for personal study and to consult well-qualified theological advisors. Residential or diocesan bishops, according to Vatican II, are authentic teachers, charged especially with the preaching of the gospel, a task they perform in the name of Christ. Notice that. Again, diocesan bishops, residential bishops, bishops with a territory, they are authentic or authoritative teachers. So if they don't have a territory, if they don't actually have a flock assigned to them by the Pope, they cannot teach authentically or authoritatively. Authentic means authoritative in this context. All they can do is speak the truth insofar as they know it, but in a non-authoritative way. But again, that's true of everybody. That's true of you and I. That's true of all laymen. That's true of all deacons. That's true of all priests. That's true of everyone. And the same applies to cardinals. I saw somebody the other day try to say that cardinals, and that this particular cardinal they were discussing, has this universal care for the whole church, and therefore it's appropriate for them to intervene with what the Pope is doing and interfere with the affairs of the Pope because it's for the good of the universal church, because he has this mission to the universal church. And I'm just thinking, wait, what? No cardinal has that. No cardinal has it. Maybe a cardinal has a mission to the universal church insofar as they are the head of a dicastery because the Pope has made them an assistant in his universal care. But apart from that, a bishop or a cardinal with no diocese and no participation in what the Pope is doing in Rome, as far as the actual mission from the Pope, he has no ability to command anyone's consciences, let alone does he have this universal mission. Any more than just you and I have a universal mission to teach the truth. I mean, again, everybody can get on YouTube and speak to the whole world, potentially, and say, hey, here's what I think the truth is. But nobody is bound to follow that. Insofar as, unless you actually have authority from Jesus Christ to teach through your ordinary mission, through a territory, then you can't bind consciences. So I hope this was helpful in clarifying that point. If it was, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And of course, check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology. If you find this material helpful and you want to see me continue to put out this material, I certainly need your assistance in continuing to put out this content. So consider supporting me there, patreon.com/reason and theology. And of course, you also get access to extra content and exclusive content for patrons. So definitely check it out. Patreon.com/reason and theology. All right. We'll see you later. Hey
todos.
friends, do you want others to discover why the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus established? And do you want to help people make sense of all the confusion in the Catholic Church today? Help contribute to this mission by supporting Reason and Theology at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. By doing so, you'll also get access to exclusive content for patrons only. Also, if you want to deepen your faith, there are free ebooks and even courses that you can sign up for by visiting reason.podia.com. Have you ever noticed that certain Catholic teachings are classified differently? For example, some are called dogmas and others are called doctrines. And then a denial of one of these teachings might be called heretical, while a denial of another might just be called an error. In reality, there are many classifications to various teachings that may be found in the Catholic Church. In my course, The Theological Notes, I offer a crash course on this system that will prepare you to identify a teaching's classification more easily. And I'll also help you determine what level of assent or adherence you are required as a Catholic to give to a particular doctrine. So, if you would like to take this course, visit reason.podia.com.